I found myself on what I refer to as a raft, uh, some sort of a platform where I was sitting on it, but it wasn't a human body like we see here on this camera. It was an energetic vision, an energetic construct of myself that I recognized. Um, and while I was sitting on these floating on these energetic waves, the one of the interesting things uh, I realized was that all of these waves were coming towards me, and it was spread out. I mean, if we think of in human terms, up, down, sideways, below, inside, whatever terminology you want to use, they came through me and continued to go.
I'm here today with my friend Philip Hasheider, who in October of 2015, he had a near-death experience. He actually died while working out at the fitness center. And he's here to share his story and some of the challenges that came afterwards and how he integrated his experience into his life. Thank you for joining me today, Philip. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you, Tia. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners
You've
about my
been
experience. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited about this too. And you've been on my podcast once before, but we felt like there was so much more to share. You thought that maybe you would come back on and share those additional things about your life after and your integration and the challenges that you experienced in your personal life, your family life, and your work life as well. So let's briefly touch on your near-death experience. Tell me about what happened there.
Sure. um, I live on a farm in south central Wisconsin, and we pasture graze beef cattle. That morning, I went out to check my beef cattle, as I did every morning, and typically was able to walk amongst them and uh, get up close to them. That morning, I couldn't. One of them saw me coming, took off across the field, and the rest did too. And it was like they saw a ghost. Now, I didn't pick up on that, and it was the first time that had happened. Uh, so that morning, I had planned to go into our local village and uh, go to our local hospital's fitness center. It's connected with the hospital, which is supervised. And I went in there, and after changing and getting upstairs and greeting the staff, I did initial exercise stretches and that sort of thing. Um, I sat down at the arm curl machine, did 20 arm curls. I got up, I looked at my arms, my forearms, because they were both tingling like they had fallen asleep. And that's the last thing I remember until 8 o'clock that night. And this was at 11 in the morning. Um, After interviewing all of the 11 people who participated in saving me, I was able to piece together what happened while I was lying unconscious on the floor. Fortunately for me, there were 5 staff people qualified to start CPR, plus the fact that our local ambulance service was right across the street. So later on, it became a question of why did my event, my collapse happen, where it did, when it did, and with all that help available. Uh, but that question didn't arise until a couple of weeks later. I spent, they were after 6 minutes, a little over 6 minutes, they were able to restart my heart with two AED shocks. And I was transported to a Madison hospital where I spent the next 4 days. So I was released after the 5th day and returned home, which for them was really good. And consequently for me, it was good too. I wasn't, uh, they didn't have to open me up to get to fix my heart. I had 2 blockages, which they were able to do via stent implants. And once once those were implanted, all my vital signs returned to normal. In fact, the vital signs I had returned to normal once they resuscitated me. So there was this unusual condition that I looked good even though I had just died. Well, the 6 minutes of my uh, other dimensional experience was what has transformed my life. I found myself in a dimension that I did not really recognize, but felt like I had been there sometime in the past, like a deja vu feeling. Um, and when I was writing out my thoughts to understand my whole experience, I found that it's difficult to express in human terms something that happened in a dimension that does not use vocabulary, it does not use language, it does not use words. The information is transmitted and received via energetic expressions. And so to instantly know something without even having to ask a question was really profound for me. But that's what I experienced there. And I'm going to say this right up front. Uh, my experience was as real to me then as it is now, 8 years later. Uh, and basically, I hope people would believe it, but I really don't care if they don't believe it because I know what my experience was, and that's what makes the difference to me. So the understanding of what I saw and bringing that information back here is all predicated on using human language as an English vocabulary to express the images and things I saw and try to give them the full complement of what I experienced. And so in my book, I've asked readers to read the words and try to embrace the vibrations that each of the words bring with the descriptions I give. Basically, and I can go through this briefly, I found myself on what I refer to as a raft, some sort of a platform where I was sitting on it, but it wasn't a human body like we see here on this camera. It was an energetic vision, an energetic construct of myself that I recognized. And while I was sitting on these floating on these energetic waves, the one of the interesting things I realized was that all of these waves were coming towards me, and it was spread out. I mean, if we think of in human terms, up, down, sideways, below, inside, whatever terminology you want to use, they came through me and continued to go. And it was like being bathed in a warm love. It was so welcoming. It was so peaceful. It was something that I didn't want to believe. I mean, it just felt good. And at that point, I did not know or realize that I had died and I was lying on the floor back at the hospital's fitness center with 11 people trying to resuscitate me. I had no idea that was happening. And I couldn't tell them, don't bother. I feel pretty good where I am now. So I looked up from the raft just to see what else was here, and there was no ceiling. I mean, it was the biggest theater I've ever been in. If you can imagine a infinite boundary, And again, up, down, sideways, however you want to imagine it. There was no enclosure within the space that I was. And in front of me, when I looked up, was this gigantic, golden, glowing orb. If you compressed 1,000,000 suns, packed them all together, it was larger than that. But I could see the edges of it so that I understood it as being an orb or a round construct. And within that, even though all of these energy waves were coming out from it and spreading in all different directions, I could still reach out and touch it and not get burned by it. It was amazing. So at one point, I remember looking around to see behind me, as we understand being in back of something. And when I turned to look, it was like there was some theaters use a scrim, which you can see through. This was like a plasma shield, but you could see through it, or I could see through it at that time. And all the energy waves kept going through. But it wasn't a barrier. It was just a emulsion of all of this together. And the interesting thing was, when I looked, I could see what I can refer to as infinity, but it was clearer the farther I looked, which seems like a contradiction, because the farther here we look, the less clear it is. But there, it was like everything was clearer the farther I looked beyond. And so I know it was a depth that I couldn't comprehend here. In that space, I noticed I'll explain it this way. If you take our universe, everything we understand to be in our universe here in this present, and compress all of it down to a single sheet of paper, and then take that and suspend it out in the middle of this eternal dimension, and then you do it with another universe and another and another, and you keep going as you line these up in a lateral direction or a vertical direction or a wide breadth direction. There were all these multiple universes, and each one of those was attached to, you could call it an umbilical cord, but an energetic filament that reached back and attached to this golden orb, which I then realized must be the God essence, the divine creator. I use the term the source of all creation, because how else could all of this be pulsating life into all these different universes that I saw? So it was a profound image. And then I saw not only myself floating, but off in different directions, other little entities floating on these waves as well. And out of this orb came all these little sparks, these little, people like fireflies shooting out and going into an infinite number of directions and heading towards one of these infinite number of universes, and not necessarily the one where we are now. So it was at that point that I realized this is where we all come from. This gigantic orb, and this is us. At some point, we've all left like that. Except I was here again. I had returned, and I had no idea why. So Eventually I left, and it was after I got my medical reports to study and talked with, and I interviewed all those 11 people who had saved me, to find out exactly what they were doing. What was the timeline? Because I felt, and I've been asked, how long did you feel you were there? My best answer is centuries. In a place that has no time, it has no space, trying to equate that to a human experience, it felt like I was there centuries. That's what it felt like. If you can close your eyes and just imagine letting your mind run through time and go through years, go through decades while you're sitting there, and go through centuries, and feel that stretch of time while you're sitting there thinking about it. That's as close as I can get to explain what it felt like to me, because it just felt like I was there for centuries. Come to find out from my medical reports, it was a little over 6 minutes. So after I started to recover, that was really one of the challenges I had. And what happened was eventually they got my heart restarted, and then I was no longer in this eternal dimension. Now, I didn't realize fully until later that night exactly where I was, because basically I had 1 foot in an eternal dimension, and I had 1 foot reintegrating here, and that was so confusing. But the ambulance people, the EMTs, the doctors, my wife, our son, and our daughter later that day said that I was talking with them, but I have no recollection of any discussion until roughly 8 o'clock at night, 8, 9 hours after this happened. And I specifically remember looking at the clock on the wall. I was lying in a gurney, and all I could see was the ceiling and the clock on the wall, and it said 8 o'clock. And I said, that can't be right, because time doesn't go backwards. I knew I had been somewhere at 11 in the morning, and now here it was 8 o'clock. And I said, that can't be. Time doesn't move backwards. And the doctor reminded me, well, that's 8 o'clock at night. So I kept my mouth shut because it didn't make any sense whatsoever, although they continued to ask me questions to engage. So roughly that is the experience. And again, if your listeners would like to access the earlier podcast, there's more of a description.
I'll link that down below, so anyone that wants to watch the more detailed version can just click on that link, and then it'll take take you right to it. And I have a quick question. While you were there in that eternal dimension, what did it feel like to you? Did you have any emotions? Did you think about your family?
If you're going to equate being in another dimension with emotions that I could bring back here, I will say it was warm, it was loving, it was welcoming, it was non-judgmental. I never felt any of that. It was just like being poured with liquid love. And there was no judgment. People have said they have seen heaven, and that's fine. That wasn't my experience, because heaven generally indicates some sort of a cloudy atmosphere. I didn't see that. All I saw was this gigantic glowing source of energy, which I interpreted as the God essence. And you can phrase it any way or use whatever word means something to you, but that's what it was. It's where everything is created, everything that was going to be and in the future is all sourced in this energy. Do I understand that? Not a bit. But all I can say is what my experience at looking at it was and feeling it. So there's the aspect of some people have said that they've seen various portions of what human language explains as, say, hell. That's not what I saw at all, because it wasn't anything. There was no hatred, because hate and fear are not a part of that dimension. It's not even an acknowledged emotion. Those are all human constructs that we've developed here to navigate our experience here. Now, I do believe that we are each one of our bodies, each one of us here living on this plane of existence. We're all our bodies are more than the sum of its parts. Because the moment I was standing next to the arm curl machine, I had all the body parts as I had moments later when I was flat on my back on the floor and they were trying to resuscitate me, except for that internal essence, that soul, if you will, had left. And that's where I found myself in this other dimension. And then once they restarted my heart, I had to come back in order to continue. I suppose my body could have not returned to function, and I'd still be there, and we wouldn't be having this conversation in this manner. So I do know that there is something within us, an inner essence, a soul, whatever you want to refer to, that is here, and that is the part that is always eternal. Because if I go back there and after I die, again, physically, that's where I'll be again. So I do know that we are an eternal being, and we are here for whatever time we've chosen to be here. But we will continue once we leave. That's what I saw. And that is, the part of the hope that we all have. And it's not just hope, it's not just faith. It is something that will happen to each one of us.
And after an experience so intense, a lot of people have trouble integrating that into their life or coming back to this physical dense realm and living a normal life again. And you experienced some challenges as well. And I think it's very helpful for people to understand they're not alone in having these challenges. And um, with you sharing how you overcame them, that might also help them learn how they can also overcome these challenges. So, a lot of near death experiencers end their marriage shortly after coming back. And you did experience some challenges with your marriage. Do you mind telling us or sharing that with us?
Oh, no, thank you for asking the question, because it is important for those who have not experienced something like this, that an NDE or even whatever traumatic experience happens within a family, it affects more than the person involved. It's like ripple effects, because you have family members, you have friends, colleagues, and whatever. And yeah, it affects everybody. Uh, I did not know about an near-death experience prior to mine happening. I had not read about anybody's. I had not studied them. So my experience was a little bit on the naive side, even at 72 years of age. Now, the one statistic that we recently found out about was the divorce rate for marriages, partners, that sort of thing, of one spouse or partner who has an NDE and the other doesn't. And that ranges between 65 and 75%, somewhere in there. And so when Mary and I, my wife and I, found that, I we thought back to how we had handled it, and there were many days when it was pretty shaky, and probably it was because of me, because having come back with a completely different set of eyes as to how I looked at things. My collapse was a demarcation line from before and everything now, after, very distinct. And I looked at things completely differently from what I had previous to my collapse. And a lot of times, Mary couldn't understand why I didn't seem to want to engage in something, or didn't seem, she thought I was oblivious to a lot of stuff that was going on. Well, partly that was physical uh, recovery, but really it was my sense that a lot of the stuff here that I was encountering again, even though it may have been routine before my collapse, didn't really matter to me as much. Certainly, my family did. I tried to keep that close, but when she would present me with some bills, I just kind of shrugged my shoulder. Yeah, okay, what about it? And being on a farm, we had we did have expenses that we had to cover, and I wasn't as able to work because I was physically tired, exhausted for a long time. Come to find out that a lot of it was related to the medication I was on, because all my vital signs were normal at this time, but I was just physically exhausted. So she wouldn't let me work with any of the machinery. She would always want to walk out with me to check the cattle, because she was not sure if I would come back, or they might, for some reason, uh, have behavior that wouldn't be normal, and they might, oh, not that they would attack me, but I could collapse in the middle of a field and then there would be nobody to assist. So I had her basically trailing behind me to make sure that I was still okay. But she had her own full-time job. She also had to uh, let my family know, my friends know, our friends. And so that there was a lot instantly dumped onto Mary's lap that I hadn't intended at all, but it's what happened. So yes, there was a struggle to maintain a connectedness between us, because mostly I had this feeling of don't sweat the small stuff, because it doesn't make any difference in the scheme of things, but to other people it does, and that's where I didn't pick up on. So that caused some, I would say, some hard feelings, disappointment from her, because she didn't think I cared about her or our family. It's just that my sense of things had changed so dramatically that uh, a lot of it didn't seem important. Not my family, but a lot of the external stuff. So yeah, there were lots of challenges with that.
And you made it through. You're still married.
We still are. However, even 8 years later, uh, I don't want to use the word landmine, because that denotes some sort of explosion, or you know a force against the person. But we still trip over them now and then, even after all this time, and it takes it takes her to point out what it is that tripped, because I'm still like, a lot of times it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to me. Now, having said that, I still have, even though I had this extraordinary experience, I still have to function as another human being. I don't get a free pass just because I have this wonderful experience. I still have to pay the bills. I still have to work. I still have to drive the car by the same rules as everybody else. So, I still have to do what humans do to navigate this dimension. But my perspective of this dimension has changed, for better or for worse, but for me, for better, because of this experience.
And on that note, you said that you came back with like a new set of eyes. How has your personal integration of this experience into your life changed the way you live, changed the way you think, your philosophies, and and how you feel about religion and death?
The I'll answer the first two questions very quickly. Um, People don't have to take this as a personal affront for what they believe. At this stage of my evolution, religion does not have the resonance as before. Uh, what we understand as religious practices are all human created. What I experienced was a God creation. And that to me is far more important in understanding. Uh, the biggest understanding that I did receive from this was to understand that each one of us here, regardless of our differences, physical, emotional, sexual, uh, religious, regardless of color, ethnicity, we're all part of the same DNA as the God essence from which we came. So we're all alike. And we just create our own differences here in this dimension to suit our own purposes. One of the other things I'm going to mention um, of what I feel now is that we try to claim a God, or we seek a God that supports our own biases, our own opinions, our own agendas, and not seek the one that is of the truest essence of love, of welcoming, of forgiveness. So that I think that covers that portion of it. The physical challenges were I was tired every day. It was after, and in fact, as I talk about in my book, I did have a second collapse about 8 months, 9 months later, and it was because of the blood pressure medications. I mean, my blood pressure dropped so much that I couldn't function, and I barely made it to the clinic where I collapsed again. Uh, and they realized, finally, the doctors over testing over the next days found that it was the medication. So once I got off that, I had a much better road to recovery. So I empathize with people who are on medications for whatever reason. They may be needed. But in my case, the frustrating thing was Mary could see me every day, and she could understand that something wasn't right. But no matter who she tried to talk to, they wouldn't change it. until all of a sudden I had to have this second collapse to get everybody's attention. So then then it became a question of why. Why did that happen the second time? And I can quickly go tell you that it happened one night. And again, this was an episode that I have no recollection from. But I came down from upstairs in the morning for breakfast and plopped myself at the end of the kitchen table across from Mary, and she was sitting there kind of with her head down looking at her notepad, and I didn't think anything of it. And she said I was talking to myself but not making any sense. And then you started shaking your head from side to side and saying, I don't believe it, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. And she asked me, what don't you believe? And she said, I told her, I don't believe why I came back. And she said, well, why did you come back? And I said, I came back to be a conduit of hope to those who don't have any or don't think there is any. And then there was this pause. And I said, what else? She said, nothing. He just laid back down and went to sleep. And as I mentioned, I have no recollection of that at all. She was prescient enough to realize to have a notepad and write down what I said, because I wouldn't have been able to remember it in the morning anyway. So once she said that, once she explained what I told her, everything made sense. I in that instant, I understood why I came back. I understood why it happened, my collapse happened, where it happened, when it happened, because there was enough people around to rescue me. Whereas if it had happened out in the middle of our pasture an hour before my collapse, when I was out with our cattle, nobody would have found me for 8 hours. Now, all the doctors had said, well, you got lucky. Well, okay, lucky in the sense that, yeah, there were that many qualified people around. But I knew it was more than luck. I knew there was some reason for me to be saved, rescued, resuscitated at that particular point. So that's what it is. And it took me a while to really understand all that, because this was, what I say, 8 months later, 9 months later, after my collapse, that realization came through. So that's what I've tried to do. And it's not because of me. It's not something that's an ego thing. It's something that I'm trying to explain to others, that there is hope. There is something beyond what we experience here. Understanding why I was here, I did write out my thoughts over those 8 months, trying to make some sense of what I experienced, what I saw, why I was still here, until that point when, in the middle of the night, I understood it, subconsciously anyway. And Mary wrote it down so that I could understand that. So my thought of writing it down to help me understand it eventually became a manuscript. And then I thought, well, maybe this would be useful to others. And again, it's not because of me, it's because of what I experienced and what it holds for other people. Whether or not they want to embrace it or accept it, that's their choice. And when I speak in front of groups, I ask them to metaphorically open your hands and be receptive to what I call possible impossibilities, because that's really what all this is. I mean, it's what human nature would say, well, that can't be possible. but it is. Uh, when when we all have dreams at some point, maybe not every night, but we have dreams, and then next morning you wake up, and it kind of dissipates, diffuses in the atmosphere. I mean, it dissolves basically. Occasionally, you may remember one or two points from the dream, but not the whole thing. At least I can't. Uh, if I remember a dream, it's a point here, a point there, whatever. This experience, my experience in that eternal dimension, has not changed one iota in 8 years. It's as crystal clear to me today as it was when it happened. And I understand that to mean that it was real, because I don't have that good of an imagination. But because nothing changes, I know it's real. It's not something that diffuses. I can sit, after we're done, I can sit and I can recall the whole episode. And I used to have to close my eyes to imagine it, but now I don't, because it's always in the background. It's nothing scary. I mean, it's just kind of comforting because I know it's there. So that has taught me that we can visit other dimensions. Because how could I understand and experience that dimension and bring that information here?
And you said it's always in the background. Do you mean your experience or the eternal dimension?
Both, both. I mean, I when I look into the distance or something, or even past trees or buildings or whatever, behind it is all of this dimension that I had seen and witnessed. I mean, and when you think about it, our universe is, and our time within this universe is all subordinate to an eternal dimension, because it's all wrapped within it, especially time. Our time here is subordinate to eternal time, because at some point there was nobody keeping track of time here on this planet, in this universe. But we've used that to help navigate our existence here. So yeah, it's always there. I mean, I can shut it off if I want, but I just let it run. It's like having a film in the background all the time, and it's become a companion, and I'm pleased with that because it hasn't left
It must be comforting to have that in the background through the rest of
me. It
your life,
is.
knowing that
It
you're going to
is.
go back there
Yeah,
someday.
it is, because I know that's where I'll end up at some point once I shed off this body. I've used an analogy that I think fits everyone, whether or not they want to accept it. But I'd like them to think about it. At some point in 1951, I came down from this higher dimension where I found myself after my collapse. I came down from this dimension down to this lower density. And I was born of my parents. I was raised by them. And in order to experience this life, I had to come as a human form. Now, I could come as another form, but it wouldn't be quite the same experience. So I've now lived, at this point, over 72 years. And when my body gets used up, I'm going to get back to the on-ramp to go back to the energetic superhighway. And I'm going to go to my next experience. I can't tell you what that is or where it'll be, but I believe it's there. And that's where I'm going to head, because we do not cease to exist once we shed off this body. We are eternal beings because we were given that gift by the divine creator, the source of all creation, We came from that nest of creation that is the God essence, if you will, of all there is. So there's really nothing to fear because we're all safe once we leave here. Now, I can't say we're all safe experiencing this dimension. I mean, safe from harm, tragedy, whatever thing happens to us. But we're safe once we leave because I experienced that. I felt that. I was safe, and yeah, that's a great thing. Um,
Does everybody get to experience that, or is there a different place for maybe different kinds of people?
my belief, and from what I saw, is that everyone is welcome. Uh, there will be nobody left behind. We will all return there because that's where we were born from. Um, we we get into right and wrong, uh, things that we consider tragic, things that we consider bad effects of other people against us. But this is the experience we're having here. No one said it was going to be all roses. Um, we all end up with different challenges. But that doesn't mean that we're not accepted. Because everything that we determine to be bad, not good, um, criminal, those are all human constructs. Those are things that we have developed a lineage from over time to, well, for whatever reason, help navigate our existence here. But that doesn't mean that someone who's accused of something isn't welcome back to where they originally started. And I know there's probably going to be some pushback on this, but if one of us is part of the God DNA, we all are. And why would God destroy us? Is a question I would ask. And someone could say, well, because you didn't do this. That's a judgment. That's an opinion. That is not a true essence of God's love, the source of all creation's love, the divine creator's love, however you want to phrase it. That supersedes everything that we can construct as some barrier against someone else. And if you look, all of our problems here have to do with not accepting the divinity in another person. We find somebody that doesn't look like us and we think they're different. So because they're different from us, we don't have to include them. We find others who don't dress like us, think like us, whatever opinions you have. And we put them into a different category because that's our way of either controlling the situation or dominating a certain person or a certain group. But that's human nature, but it's a lineage we've been grown up with. And one of the hardest things I think for people to do is to imagine everyone dropping their biases, everyone dropping their feelings of revenge, everyone dropping their dominating feelings of another group, another country, another person. What would happen? What would it look like if we all dropped all those biases? Well, we'd actually probably get along. So why wouldn't that be possible? Personally, I think that It's going to be my grandson's generation and my granddaughter's generation that really are going to change things. Now, I can't prove that, and I probably won't be here to see it, but that is my belief. I see it in those children of that age, and not just my families. I see that in all these children out there. They're going to be born to a different set of circumstances, and that to me is very hopeful.
If my viewers wanted to find you, if they have more questions for you, how can they reach out?
Yes, they can find me at Facebook at Hasheider books, and also Philip Hasheider books at gmail.com.
And do you have any last words to leave my audience with today?
Well, thank you for the invitation, Tia. I've really enjoyed this conversation. What I would say to anyone who's listening to this, don't be hard on yourself. Take a look at what can be hopeful. Don't listen to the doubters, which is a tall task in a lot of cases. And if they're interested in finding out more about my experience, they can get a copy of my book. It's You can get it through libraries as well, as I understand it.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than what we discussed today. And also, your previous podcast, just a reminder, that's linked below if anyone wants to watch that with the more detailed version. Thank you, Philip, so much for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Tia. Again, it's my pleasure to talk with you and to your listeners. And best to you and best to them.
Best to you as well. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.